All right. Hello, everyone. Very special episode here today. I'm joined with my friend Dusty Backer from Backer's Bees. He's a beekeeper, he's an avid outdoorsman, and he loves deer. He loves watching deer, he loves eating deer. And he has become concerned and knowledgeable about a fake disease in deer called chronic wasting disease. You may have heard of this before. We're going to dive into chronic wasting disease here. And many people might not know how important this is, but I would call this a very important thing because they have used the same criteria to create new government oversight over cows, sheep, birds, right? These are fake diseases in animals that have created new government apparatuses. Millions of animals have been killed needlessly from this. And one of the results, whether it was intentional or not, one of the results is keeping us further away from super healthy natural food in the case of deer. If you think that your wild animals are diseased, you probably are just going to go to the grocery store. Meanwhile, there is no guarantee at all that those animals are any healthier or better for you. And I would argue that they are a lot less healthy for you in the grocery store. So this is actually an excellent food source that's been taken away from us. And I know a lot of the listeners here will be living in cities and stuff, and they're so far removed from deer that they don't think that this is a big issue. Whereas most of America, most of Canada is forested, it's farmland, it's deer country. And it's not just deer, it's deer and elk and moose and caribou and bison, all this stuff. Even though most of Americans live in the cities, most of the landmass actually is deer country. And there is quite a lot of free, healthy meat out there that could be sustaining more people, taking more pressure off of the industrial agriculture. And if more city folk knew about this too, I think they might be interested in this as a food source. And they're wonderful to look at anyways. This is just one thing that makes our lives better, especially when you live in the country, is seeing deer, seeing moose. It's just an awesome little addition to life. And when you can eat them, it's even better. But when the government has us convinced that they're diseased, and not only does that take it away from us, but it also gives them millions or billions of dollars to just have these departments dealing with this. So Dusty does have an excellent documentary. It's 30 minutes long. It's on YouTube. It's called CWD. They missed it by a million miles. I'm going to put that in the description. I highly encourage you to watch that and to share it, especially with people you know in the country, your deer-loving friends, your hunter uncle. They need to know about this because people are being duped big time. Hunters and deer farmers, everybody seems to have fallen for this. And as Dusty says, they missed it by a million miles. So, Dusty, what happened? What got you interested in this in the first place?
So, me and my wife live in North Dakota, and in 2021, our deer, we had a major disease come through. It's called EHD, epizootic hemorrhage disease, and it killed the deer by the thousands. It's a little midge bug that carries the virus, and once the white-tailed deer, it only affects white-tailed deer, not mule deer. But anyway, it just killed 98% of our whitetail. I found 100 dead deer within a mile of creek bottom, 100 dead deer. And our agency continues to say this EHD is no big deal. CWD is an epidemic. We're on the verge of an epidemic. When in the state of North Dakota, there's been one deer confirmed to have a TSC encephalopathy out of 40,000 deer tested. That is not an epidemic. One out of 40,000 deer. In the state of Texas, there's been one confirmed in court that has died from CWD, which me and my wife call clearly wasted dollars. There's been one out of a 6 million deer herd in the state of Texas. And they've slaughtered over 400,000 deer in the state of Texas, all because of this clearly wasted dollars disease.
So you're saying there was an actual disease from a bug that actually killed deer?
EHD, yeah, it's a virus. They carry a virus. It's called epizootic hemorrhage disease, EHD. That's the big killer of deer, not CWD.
But they're not doing anything about that.
Nope, they say there's nothing they can do, but CWD is just an epidemic across the nation and going to just kill our deer. And here they are 57 years later, and still we have a growing deer populations.
So you're saying this whole CWD hoax started 57 years ago.
Started in 1967 in a Colorado government research facility.
What did they find there?
Some sick mule deer inside a fence. Some sick mule deer, and Beth Williams labeled it chronic wasting disease. So, and then in 1982, Stanley Prusiner came out and said that it's a prion or prion that's causing this TSE. And yet, Dr. Wallach has done 32,000 autopsies on over 454 different species using an electron microscope of 126,000 times, and he's never seen a prion. So we started calling around to Case Western, which is the leading TSE researcher in the research and facility in the nation in Ohio, and they can't show us a microscopic slide of a prion or prion either.
How many times you call them, bugging them for that?
Oh, many emails, phone calls, and finally we got the pathology administrator to call back because she did not understand what we were looking for, and all we said was, all we're looking for is a slide of a prion or prion. And she emails us a 2021 research paper, 81,000 magnification, when Dr. Wallach used 126,000 magnification. And if people would read the microscopic slides in the research paper, it says fibrils. Well, Dr. Wallach says fibrils they're just fibers. It could be connective tissue. It could be blood vessels. You have to dissect and cut into those. And then the rest of the research paper is just the graphics. And if everybody looks up prions, please do on Google or DuckDuckGo, you'll see that it's just graphics.
Yeah. For the audio people, I highly encourage you just to Google it. Just prion picture. Prion. People say it different, but PRION picture. And what you're going to see is a lot of CGI, a lot of drawings, and sometimes you see tissue slides that just look like a total mess. And you got to read between the lines here. This is not a prion. This is damage from prion protein. Okay, so this is a mess of cells here. If you look at almost anywhere in the body of an animal, you're going to see a bunch of little things, bunch of little dots, bunch of little spirals, bunch of little organic material. And they decided to call some of these things prions. And I'm not actually denying that some of these animals were sick.
Right, correct.
Scrappy or scrapey. In sheep, these animals can be sick. We're going to talk about how there could be reasons for that, but they're taking these slides of sick animals and saying, hey, this is proof of prions. That's not a picture of a prion. Right? There's the same problem with viruses too. There's not a picture of a virus. There's CGI of virus. And that's what Dr. Wallach said too. Yeah, he said just the whole time he's been around, he's never seen a picture of a prion because there isn't a picture of a prion.
Right, the graphics. And I just found too, Ryan, you can look up misfolded proteins because that's what they say a prion is. And a lot of the graphics look like it's collagen. It's basically the fibers like Dr. Wallach was talking about. It can be hemoglobin. A lot of the same graphics, the spirals, the proteins are all over the body. It was 1967. Beth Williams labeled these sick deer that they had a chronic disease. So she labeled it chronic wasting disease. These deer were just wasting away. In 1982, Stanley Prusiner is one who labeled it a prion or prion. So 42 years ago, it was labeled a prion.
And Prusiner was also involved in labeling Kuru a prion disease. Right? You heard of Kuru?
I've heard about Kuru, yes. I did not know he labeled that one.
Yeah, so Kuru was always controversial. Kuru was supposed to be caused by cannibalism in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea. And apparently when their loved ones died, out of respect, they ate the corpse, okay? And this guy called Gajdusek, I'm not sure how to say his name, Gajdusek. he came up with this Kuru thing. No one else was able to confirm it, by the way. And even the pictures that he took, claiming that this was evidence of cannibalism, people looked at it and said, that looks a lot like pork. It looks like it was kind of a hoax. It looks like this Gadusek guy made this up. I'm not 100% sure here, but there is quite a lot of stories about this. And what he came up with Kuru was the first example of a slow virus, is what they called it, right? Because most other pathogens that we're aware of, you get it pretty quickly. There might be a few days, there might be a few weeks, like maximum of a so-called incubation period. But this was the first time that an incubation period was stretched into years. So it was called a slow virus. And this really matters because when people were first looking at AIDS and other weird, hard to explain illnesses, they took this slow virus thing for granted. Like, oh no, it's been proven there's slow viruses. They did it with Kuru. That's the first slow virus. So this could be another slow virus type of thing, right? AIDS has a decade plus long incubation period, is what they say, right? A lot of this comes from this Kuru. And yeah, Brusner was involved in this. And he began arguing in the 80s that the very definition of a virus should be changed, right? The basic concept of an infectious microbe incorporates the assumption that it is genetically alien to the host it invades. But Prusner speculated instead that the scrappy or scrapey agent could be a host protein, one of the normal molecules found in healthy brains. So it's like a mutated brain cell. Trying to explain why only some individuals became sick, he added that the prion, as he dubbed these hypothetical infectious proteins, would have to be a mutant or chemically altered form of the normal protein. It was kind of like a cancer mutation, sort of. And yeah, it was an upside down proposal, and a lot of other virologists didn't buy it at first, but eventually this theory just kind of became entrenched, and now everyone believes, yep, slow viruses are a thing, yep, prions are a thing, even though they really have never been proven at all. So tell us more about that. What have they tried to do to prove prions are causing this chronic wasting disease?
Thousands and thousands of Frankenstein studies, just injecting brain material or saliva or feces into all kinds of animals, trying to get it to become infectious. And it's never, to this day, it doesn't meet Koch's postulates whatsoever. And there's still no pictures, which means it's not contagious. And that's what the agencies are continually telling everyone across the nation is just, it's so contagious. The prions are everywhere. They live in the soils, and yet there's no pictures. Hasn't satisfied Koch's postulates. It's still a theory or hypothesis after 57 years. Anyone can look it up. Go to Cornell University or go to your agency and look at chronic wasting disease and start looking into their robust science. It'll just be theory and the most accepted. And you can go to the CDC. It still says it's believed to be. It's always believed to be.
Yeah, I was actually just looking at the New York State Department of Health chronic wasting disease page, and that's also what they say here. The cause of the disease is suspected to be a type of prion, protein infectious particle, which doesn't even make sense. How is it infectious? It's protein. What are you talking about here? Is this a life form or not? But they're not even saying that it's a life form. They're just trying to twist the words around to make it so that a regular protein can turn infectious somehow. It doesn't even make sense.
After 57 years, Ryan, you either have it or you don't. You either can show us a slide of a prion or you can't. Every deer would be gone. We have growing deer populations. I mean, there's deer populations in Wisconsin that are 50 to 60, 70% positive, and their population continues to grow. Which brings us to another CWD. There's so much money. I mean, they've spent over $500 million already the last 57 years and can't even prove it's contagious. And now they want to spend another $420 million on another federal bill, HR 5608, that the audience can look up. And it's just the more positives they find in your state, the more money the agencies get. The new areas that find it, the more money they get. And stricter management, the more money they get. And all these testing companies are coming out now. The blood test for CWD, We want to test the saliva, the feces, the urine. They're just trying to find something. And these tests are not picking up prions or prions, Brian. There's
So,
two different entities when it comes to CWD. You have the test that they're using to slaughter all these deer and tell us that they're positive when they're testing lymph nodes, tonsils, or the rectum that get rid of toxins out of the body. And you have CWD, a truly degenerative disease. As Dr. Wallach says, it's just a mild and deteriorating. It's not prions or prions.
so he's saying it's like MS for deer.
MS, that's exactly what Dr. Wallach said. It's like MS, ALS, CJD. That's the big one our agencies always want to relate it to is CJD, just because it's the holes in the brain, but that's just the mildly deteriorating that part of the brain. Parkinson's disease, a lot of similarities. It just all depends, like Doc said, which part of the brain or spinal cord that it's affecting.
And that has nothing to do with the virus.
Correct. Nothing to do with the prion.
We're going to talk about CJD. Don't you worry. We're going to get to that. But you mentioned earlier, and people might have heard this if they just listened to our recent episode with the undercover virologists, where we're talking about how they've been trying to prove for decades here various viruses and stuff that are transmittable, supposedly. They're trying to prove this by literally injecting brain material into other brains. And this is exactly what happened with the Kuru thing. Again, Kuru is very important here. It's an important stepping stone into what became modern virology. And this Gajusek guy, he did the same thing. He tried to transmit Kuru from victims to chimpanzees, but none of the animals became sick when injected with blood, urine, or other bodily fluids from Kuru patients, nor from the cerebral spinal fluid that surrounds the brain. And this fluid should have been full of the alleged brain-destroying virus. The monkeys contracted no disease even from eating Kuru-affected brains. But one experiment did work, which he took the brains of Kuru patients, ground them into a mush, and injected them directly into the brains of live monkeys through holes drilled in their skulls. Within months to years, so they didn't even get sick right away from that, having holes drilled in their skulls and having brain injected into their brain. Within months to years, some, not all, some of the experimental monkeys suffered coordination and movement problems. Surprisingly, though, even this extreme method could not transfer Kuru disease to dozens of other animal species, and no virus could be seen in the brain tissue, even using the best electron microscopes.
Imagine that. Very similar to the CWD Frankenstein studies as well.
Similar to many different viruses, honestly. They're desperate, but when does your brain come into contact with brain, right? That's not how viruses are supposed to be transmitted. They inject blood and urine and other stuff into the blood, and it does not cause the animals to be sick.
And when does any of these Frankenstein studies happen? When does this happen naturally or in nature?
No, nothing like it. But even then, even injecting brains into brains, most of the animals still don't get sick. So it's pretty interesting there.
And there's a deer study out there too, a recent one where they put the deer in light anesthesia every week and inject saliva in its mouth, but so it wakes up, it can actually swallow the saliva. And some of these deer 3 months later are coming down with what they call the disease only by the test. They did not autopsy these deer to see if they had the disease, only by the test methods that they use. And I'm pretty sure if you start putting us to sleep once a week and injecting stuff in our mouth or our brains, we're going to have something too. Some virus or bacteria or something pop up in our body.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is going to remind a lot of people of COVID times too, right? Oh, this is how we detect disease now. We take a test. We don't look at symptoms anymore. Don't worry. You just take a test, and if you're positive, you have it. You got to go to the hospital. That's what they say.
And that's we reached out to one of the testing. So there's 3 different ways to test for CWD. You have the Western blot, which they kind of done away with, but the IHC, it's an immuno test. And then they have the ELISA test. So we reached out to a manufacturer who makes these tests, and he said they're very similar to a PCR test.
Just looking for random bits of DNA.
They pick up antigens and things attached to it, like the bacteria, viruses, or fungus, or yeast. said nothing about a prion or prion, and said a lot of them are not even shouldn't even be used because a lot of the manufacturers are getting them from China, and we can't buy them. There's only 25 or 30 facilities, Ryan, state universities or federal agencies that can actually, they got total control of the tests, the testing methods, what their tests are picking up, and reached out to them as well. And they won't even share any details and slides on a prion or prion, or it's just all under lock and key.
None
A
of this,
lot of money attached.
none of this is surprising to me.
They've spent about roughly 500 million in the last 57 years since they labeled it CWD in 1967. And then now there's another $420 million up for grabs for these testing companies. And now you see literally testing companies coming out of the woodwork, and they want to push it. They want to push it on the genomes. I mean, there's nothing in this bill or this money that, I mean, is right whatsoever. It all just needs the money goes away, so does CWD. Let's just say that the testing and money goes away, so CWD. It's just the money and the fear.
It's a total industry.
Yep.
So to be clear here too, if people might be thinking, well, if there's sick animals out there and they can transmit something, whether it's a prion or not, well, then maybe that's a good thing. Well, it's still here on the New York Health Department website. There's no indication to date that CWD is a threat to domestic animals or livestock other than deer or elk, and there have been no reports of CWD in dogs or cats. Or people. Yeah. So there is no cases. Like, I know they use the mad cow disease to scare people and saying people could get this as well. Again, we'll talk about that later. But in the case of CWD, that's not even the case. Nobody is claiming that you as a human have any risk of contracting this. So even if we could accept that it is a real disease, to me, there's no reason to be wasting my tax money for testing or culling wild animals that have no ability to transmit it to me or my dog, basically.
Correct. Every state less than 1%. Like North Dakota is 0.005%, and they want to say it's contagious. And Texas isn't a lot different with a 6 million deer herd. That's what we keep going back to. I mean, CJD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, none of those are contagious. CWD is made out to be this and scrape just fatal disease.
And it only affects the animals that are affected by it, not anybody else. Yeah, it's just wild to me too. And even then, they're still advising that you be super careful when you're handling them and don't eat them or anything, even though there's no proof that even eating one of these animals would do anything to you. I think it just wouldn't taste very good.
We've all eaten CWD deer. Guarantee it.
Since so many of them are infected.
Exactly. That's what they tell us.
And you don't have
deer.
You don't have mad deer disease.
That's right.
And you eat a lot of deer, right?
We live off of deer. Yes. Deer steak. I mean, we put 5-6 in the freezer every year. That's what we live off of. We'll get a little bit of beef here and there given to us from friends and family, just from steaks and roasts. But no, it's strictly pretty much 95% deer, venison, wild game.
And I said this at the beginning, but I mean, it's worth diving into just a little bit more. We're so stuck for food options, and even those health-minded people like us, okay, we want to buy the organic cow and all this stuff. And there's a good argument to be made for cows that they should be part of the diet. But I would much rather eat healthier, leaner, more muscular animals than a big fat cow. Again, I don't have a problem with cow. It's just like we've made it such a huge part of our diet, but I think it should be balanced with goat, with sheep, with deer, elk, caribou, moose. And all these animals taste excellent. They are free. And I know a lot of city dwellers, again, probably 90% of the listeners here are city dwellers who can't dream of hunting and stuff, but hunting gets you outside, gets you away from the computer, gets you away from all this nonsense. It's just a nice thing. Everyone I know who hunts loves it. And usually they don't even get a deer. They don't even get a moose. They like the time outside and all this stuff. And when you do get a deer, you got a bunch of free meat. Fresh, completely fresh. It hasn't been tampered with. No butcher used glue to glue different pieces of meats together They didn't use any dyes to make it look red, and it's got a great fat to protein ratio. Like it's super healthy for us. It's abundant, right? If anyone thinks that deer are in trouble, no, they're not. There's abundant deer. And if anything, the fact that hunting is kind of decreased has made deer a little bit of a problem in some places. You drive across America, you see dead deer all over the road. They're everywhere. They get hit by cars, and it's actually a problem when they can actually end up killing a lot of people. That if you look it up, how many people are killed by deer, it's practically all car accidents. And where I live, it's moose, and it's a big deal. If you hit a moose, you're probably gonna die. You know, not saying that we should get rid of all of them, but no, we share this ecosystem with them, and if we don't hunt them, they will breed out of control, and more humans will actually die from hitting them in their cars. It's a real thing. So we should keep their numbers under control, and we shouldn't waste all this awesome, free, healthy, good tasting meat. This could take pressure off of the food system.
And it's more than just hunting too, like you said, or just killing, I should say, because it's a big family thing for us. Like our boys, I mean, we get together over Christmas and we process all of our own meats. We put all of our deer in the freezer after we harvest them. And then over Christmas time, we get together and we cut it all off the bone and we process it. Just a lot of family time. It gets you out in nature. It's so rewarding.
Absolutely. And now you know about the power of organs and stuff too, and you can use all them as well.
That's right. Yep. Eat deer liver every week.
And a lot of people are into organ meats now, and they're realizing they can really only buy liver. Sometimes you can buy chicken hearts and kidneys, but there's not all the organs available. In fact, most of the organs from our farm animals are sold to pet foods. They're put into pet foods because our pets get more nutrients than we do. I'm just saying, people are waking up and seeing posts and all this stuff going viral, carnivore and all this stuff. Organs are really good for us. Well, yeah, they are really good for us. All the longest lived populations always ate all the everything they could in the animal, and we don't. We take all that extra scrap, they call it, and put it in pet foods, whereas we should be eating that. And if you shoot your own deer, you get to use all of it. All of it. You could even use the hide.
Yep, that's right. And our dogs get our bones. We cut all of our bones up into 6-inch chunks too, so they can get the bone marrow out of the deer bones.
It's very efficient. There's no trucks involved. There's no slaughterhouses. All this stuff. Every point in the supply chain, from cow or chicken to table, something can go wrong. Something can be tampered with. Can get old and sit around the grocery store too long. All kinds of things can tamper with the quality of your meat. Whereas most of that is just eliminated if you get it yourself.
Yep.
And it's not all about farming. You know, this conversation usually comes down to, oh, grow your own food and have your own chickens and stuff. And that's great, but it's nothing compared to how much does a deer weigh? 600 pounds?
No, about 250.
Oh, yeah. But still, is that after harvest?
No, that's before harvest. So we probably get 100 to 125 pounds of meat off a big buck, about 100 pounds, 75 pounds off a doe. That's not including the organ meat, though.
Or the bones, no?
Or the bones. Nope.
Still, it's an awful lot of harvestable meat that would cost you a lot to raise that as a goat or a cow. You know, not everyone has pasture and all this stuff to do it anyways. And most of this, like where I live, this province of Ontario in Canada, I'm pretty sure it's like 90% the government owns anyways. It's mostly just a big, huge forest that the government owns. So nobody can use that as pasture land and stuff anyways. And it's crawling with deer and moose. So there's plenty to go around. You know, we're not stuck in scarcity or anything, but yeah, I don't know if it's conspiracy trying to take this away from us, but I do think that this is a consequence of what has happened.
Yeah, conspiracy equals critical thinker.
Well, I mean, I don't think they did this to be like, okay, we're gonna create this bureaucratic apparatus to test and kill deer just to get deer meat away from us. But I think that was a result of this. I think it's just for money, honestly. They just want to justify jobs. The government always wants to grow and increase their budgets. And as you said, they basically doubled the last 50 years that they got. They almost doubled it just in a new contract now. That's a lot of secure jobs, right?
Right.
pension jobs with good insurance programs and stuff. They don't want to get rid of that.
It's definitely the money and power, and I think it's they did realize too, though, like, oh, it's we are kind of decreasing the best meat on the planet, and oh, now we're losing hunters nationwide, so there goes some of the guns as well.
Yeah, as a side benefit, they do want to get rid of our guns, right? So yeah, it's another reason. Well, you don't need hunting rifles if you can't shoot anything. And you can't shoot anything if they're all diseased. Every animal's diseased. You can't shoot it. Beware. Even though
Fear, fear, fear.
even though it can't transmit to you. So this does go back into the CJD, the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which is a sponge-like brain disease. It rots their brains. And I want to bring this up because I want to speculate also on what could be causing CWD in some cases of some of these animals as well. Dr. Wallach said that it's basically a form of MS. Well, animals can be nutrient deficient just like we are. For example, the state of upstate New York is pretty well known at this point to have a rather large incidence of transgender deer, right? Transgender deer. And I personally think that is because that area is selenium deficient. Upstate New York, selenium deficient. And so I suspect that you'll see many different diseases there at a higher rate in deer than you'll see in other states, basically. And pesticide use could be one thing as well. Farm residues and contaminated rivers and stuff like that. It could be drinking atrazine that gets into the rivers and all that stuff. But when it came to BSE was like the big hysterical one, even though chronic wasting disease has been happening supposedly since 1967. Most people never heard about it, but they have heard of Creutzfeldt-Jakob. And, there's been import bans and stuff on certain cattle and whatever. Like, it was made to be a pretty big deal. And they do even claim that humans can be affected by eating these CJD cows. And they're still predicting it, by the way, today. They're still predicting that there's going to be outbreaks of this stuff. And it has created a huge bureaucracy in testing cattle. And I'm reading from a book here called Virus Mania. Several authors on there. Virus Mania is a very good book. And they're going through the history here and saying that, the horror stories never proved true. Not a single German died from they're Germans who wrote that book. Not a single German has died from this disease, even though they were calling for epidemics and possibly tens of thousands of human deaths from this. And even in 2001, the British Medical Journal finally came out and said, CJD, the epidemic that never was. Meaning they recognized that this was just a pure hype piece. Everyone just got on the hype train that this is going to kill everyone. All of our livestock's infected. We got to kill it all and start over and all this stuff. And it was just a total hoax. And in 2005, they again came out and said CJD is canceled. It's canceled because it never happened. You need to stop it. Stop freaking people out over nothing. The BSE hysteria cost Germany at least 1.5 billion euros for nothing, right? Total waste of money. You said chronic waste of dollars. This is a chronic waste of euros. All the obligatory BSE tests on cattle were completely pointless and a pure waste of money. Among the 5.1 million cattle tested, just 200 sick animals were found. And if you believe in infection, those 200 cattle could have infected 3 people at most over the next 30 years. So you spend $1.5 billion to test 5.1 million cattle, which even if you believe the viral theory, would only have hurt 3 people at most over 30 years. It just seems pretty crazy to me. There's a lot of things we could do with $1.5 billion. And it seems like a massive scam there. But they were talking here about the prions as well. The atomic structure of these allegedly infectious prion proteins isn't even known. That was from 2004. It's still true today. There are numerous flaws in the experiments upon which these hypotheses are based. Extracts from the brains of animals with neural diseases were directly injected into the brains of test animals. Once again, when after a year they detected the existence of nerve damaging accumulations or plaques, right? Kind of like MS, and holes in the brain, it was taken as proof that a prion had caused the infection, which in turn had caused the development of the plaque. But the alterations in the brain could also have another cause. They could be the consequences of an immune reaction, for instance, with which the body defends itself against foreign proteins. In this case, the foreign proteins that were injected into the brain, right? Your body reacts to it, and that could cause inflammatory damage. It could cause plaque, but the researchers didn't consider this at all, even though there was at least one immunologist in 1998 who pointed this out and said if you inject brain material from animals suffering from encephalopathies into brains of healthy animals, that didn't necessarily prove the transmission of scrapie or BSE. And this is important, right? This is used to control livestock. This is used basically as a tax on farmers and ultimately on consumers. It's crazy that we all pay for this in increased food prices because of increased procedures that are needed for our livestock. But we also pay for the bureaucracy that does all this testing and stuff in the first place too. So we get double taxed for literally no reason to monitor a bunch of fake diseases that, even if they are real, have almost no ability to impact you or impact anyone. So that researcher there was saying that I think all prion experiments involve the production of encephalopathy and not the transmission of BSE. So yeah, they're creating brain inflammation by injecting brains into brains. They're not proving transmission of anything. And of course, a mind boggler is that in these experiments, there's no controls. So there's no comparative group of animal that are injected with something that could be compared to the test subjects, right? Okay, so think about it. They're taking Kuru brains or BSE brains and they're injecting it into animals to see what happens. They're not taking healthy brains and injecting healthy brains into a control group. They probably would get sick at the same rates, in my estimation here. But yeah, there's no controls on any of this stuff. They're just digging and publishing whatever it is that they find. And they said that BSE was spread by feeding bone meal to cows, but that has been pretty much disproven. When you look at Britain, and remember, we banned imports of meat from England for a while, right, because of this. But within Britain, most of the CJD cases were observed in northern Scotland, while most cattle with BSE were found to be in southern England. So it's basically impossible. You got cows in southern England that are causing CJD in northern Scotland. You need to stop it, right? You don't think people from southern England bought the meat that was produced in southern England? They just shipped it all to northern Scotland. They skipped everyone in between. Crazy. Has nothing to do with it. And this could only be explained if that meat was only eaten in the north of Scotland, which is, of course, impossible. That's not how meat supply works. But what really happened, and I'll give it back to you, Dusty, but what really happened here, this book suspects, is that in 1985, a law was passed in England forcing British farmers to apply Fosmet, which is, it kills flies. It's an insecticide, Fosmet, to the necks of their cattle. So they were forced to put insecticide on their cattle. And Fosmet is a known organophosphate, which is a highly toxic chemical, and it causes severe neural damage. It causes damage to the nerves, to the brains, to the nervous system. We know this. This is not some fringe theory here. So government forces you to put neurotoxic stuff on your cattle, and then the cattle get a neurotoxic disease, and they say, oh, it must be a prion. Crazy. And only in Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and Switzerland was Fosmet used in such high concentrations. And those are the countries where almost all the BSE cases have occurred. Right? No wonder. Makes perfect correlation sense to me. And there were organic farmers that never had any cases of any of this stuff, even though they fed the bone meal to their cows. They were just never treated with the organophosphates, and this problem never had. And the British government knew about these connections. And actually, in the 1990s, that law was repealed. They no longer have to apply Fosmet to the necks. And what do you know? There's also been a dramatic reduction in BSE cases. And the British BSE investigative board also admitted that organophosphate was evidently a cofactor, at least, a cofactor in the onset of BSE. Well, we've known for a long time that organophosphate poisoning leads to polyneuropathy, neuropathic damage, widespread neuropathic damage. And it could look like a muscle disorder, it could look like a wasting disorder, because it can hit the nervous system at any different point in the nervous system, and you'll show up with slightly different symptoms. Do you think that has any correlation to chronic wasting disease?
I'm not sure, I guess, Ryan. I wouldn't doubt it at all. Between scrapie and sheep and CWD, I'm not sure if like the farm cervids, if they, dip their deer or not. But as far as any toxicities, absolutely. And I would say go back to the nutrient deficiencies. Soils are not equal, like you mentioned. And in the Dakotas, we're really high in selenium up here. And our agencies continue to tell us they don't, really across the nation, they don't want any of us to supplemental feed our deer. Well, why are we supplemental feeding all of our livestock with mineral blocks and salt blocks and giving them the best food possible? That's like suicide.
Yeah, you were saying that they were telling you in North Dakota not to feed your deer. Even this past winter, was it? That it was a really rough winter and like deer were dying from exposure and stuff?
Yeah, in 22, 23 winter, we had about anywhere from 50 inches to 100 inches of snow. And our agency refused to help feed the deer, which the deer still yard up at big landowners who have hay bales, corn piles, because they're starving to death. They need the nutrients. I mean, those does have fawns in them, so they need the best nutrition out there. So that's why they go to the farmsteads. And our agency refused to help the landowners feed the deer, and we lost 50,000 plus deer that one winter because they refused to help feed the deer.
Because they think that the virus is spread at these feeding stations.
Correct.
That seems pretty cruel.
Yet there's only been 120 detections out of 40,000 plus deer tested in 20 years, and only one confirmed.
Tell us about this incident that happened in Texas recently. You were telling me about last time we saw each other.
About the slaughtering.
Yeah, at a farm, right?
Yeah. So, Breeder Ranch in Texas, he's been fighting the agency, the Texas Parks and Wildlife, for several years, and has spent I don't know how many millions of dollars fighting him, trying to keep his deer alive because he had a detection in his ranch. When you get a positive detection in your ranch, the Texas Park and Wildlife can come in and they'll kill your whole herd. Now, keep in mind, that's just because of what they picked up on the test. Not necessarily no clinical signs, but they can show up positive on this test, and it doesn't matter. All the healthy deer are slaughtered. Well, he ended up losing in the courts, and in May, the TPWD went in there and slaughtered all 249 of this guy's deer at night with 68 people from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Division. They had him in one pen, and they were running around and just breaking legs. I mean, can you imagine just the massacre and how scared these deer were? And not a single deer had died in his ranch from CWD. And he hasn't been able to work his deer the last 2 years. And I mean, it's sickening when you think about it.
Where are the animal rights people? Where's PETA?
Exactly. Good point. Exactly. It made the news. I mean, can't remember how many years he was in the business, since the 80s. He and his daughter ran this business and had some of the best breeder bucks. I mean, some of his bucks worth, anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. I mean, he had one in there for 15 years old, and CWD didn't kill him. 15 years old.
And none of these animals were dying of anything.
CWD.
They were just, but like they weren't sick at all.
Well, they were like, he wasn't able to work his deer the last couple of years. So in the ranches, you need to like cut the racks off and stuff because the bucks will fight. I mean, bucks killed each other, and they were dying of other causes, but not CWD. Every deer that tests positive and is killed because of CWD or shot by an agency, it needs to be autopsied immediately. Majority of these deer aren't even going to have the disease.
So they came in with a random inspection and started doing some swabs or something.
Well, they came in and they tested his deer, found a positive a couple of years ago. Well, then I believe they tested in Texas. I think you have to test 100% of your animals. And he had 200 or 200 some that were tested positive according to the test. And he was fighting in court. And we were trying to help him too to keep his deer alive. And the TPWD has total control over the deer in the state of Texas because they belong to the state. Where in North Dakota, our Board of Animal Health is in charge of our farmed cervids in North Dakota. Our agency in North Dakota only has control over the wild deer. Or in Texas, the TPWD have control over all the deer.
Land of the free here.
That's right.
But they did. They ended up going in and slaughtering them all.
For them all, we haven't seen any test results yet. Waiting on the test results. They took every lymph node and Obex and actually just asked for it here a couple of days ago. And so
not only is that pretty barbaric, government's coming in and killing all your animals. Animal rights people should be upset about that, but this probably ruined this guy's livelihood.
No, he's done. Yeah. And they've put, I think, I don't know how many hundreds out of business like this the last 12 to 14 years. You get a positive, they slaughter your entire herd, put you out of business. And then sounds like you get the bill for it.
Really?
Yes. Yes. And then they even slaughtered, the Texas Parks and Wildlife even slaughtered their own facility. Last fall, they had a positive detection, 67 or 68 deer, slaughtered them all before they even got the test results back. The next test showed it was negative. Slaughtered their 50 or 60-year research facility, their own facility. It's just time and time and time again in Texas. It's unbelievable. And like the Ox Ranch, it's another huge ranch. Well, they had a positive detection, but this buck was on their property for 2 years. They went back and slaughtered every doe, every fawn from the last 2 years that buck had been around. Every single deer was negative.
So they don't care if it tests negative, but if one of them, if their father tested positive, they're dead.
On that ranch, they went back for 2 years. Every deer that buck was around, they slaughtered it. They've killed over I don't even know how many, 700 of their own deer, all because of this one detection of this buck, but it's so contagious.
And they come in, they kill your deer, and they charge you for it.
They send you the bill.
What's the bill?
I'm not sure.
I'm interested. Wow.
I have to get more details on it. That's just what a few people have mentioned to us. But regardless, if the TPWD's coming in, 68 people slaughtering your deer, they work for us. They work for the people are paying for it.
Of course. Are there any other states that are as bad as Texas that take such control like this?
Wisconsin slaughters a lot of deer, but if you have a research facility in Wisconsin, they won't slaughter your deer.
Why?
I'm not sure if it's something they have through legislation, but if you have positive, they come in and slaughter all your deer. But if you have a research facility, they don't slaughter your deer.
Seems pretty arbitrary to me.
But you got to remember that, again, the test and the disease. I want to make that loud and clear. It's two different things. You have the testing tonsils or lymph nodes or rectum, the areas that get toxins out of your body, versus actually having CWD, a neurodegenerative disease, which is less than 1%.
So we're not disagreeing that chronic wasting disease is a thing. There are deer, elk, moose that can look feeble, that can be degenerating, that can have demyelination or, deer MS. This is a thing. This is a real thing. We're just disagreeing that it's caused by some magical protein. And it still blows my mind here. I'm going back to this, that everybody says you cannot contract this. It will not hurt you. So, right. Who cares? If I eat a sick deer, who cares? If I have a sick deer, if it is really sick, right? And you're saying they're testing these things positive and like on these farms and stuff, they're not actually sick. They don't have chronic wasting disease. They just have these fake proteins, which just like the tests for COVID and all this stuff, they can find DNA sequences whenever they want. They're looking for sub-micro particles here. You can find these particles if you look deep enough. You'll find them in humans probably too. Right? And you go out testing, the more you test, the more you find, basically. So they're finding positive tests, but they're not finding CWD cases. But even if it was CWD, who in the heck cares? Who cares? They don't seem to care about the deer itself, right? Like they're willing to kill them all in order to save them, kind of thing. So
Right.
even if CWD is transmitted by a virus or a prion or something, why does the government care about this? So what? You're willing to kill all the deer anyway. Who cares?
Right. Testing epidemic. It's just a testing epidemic with a lot of money and power behind it.
Crazy. And I
Really?
bet 95% of the people listening have never heard of this at all.
Sure, probably. But it's just another topic that's, going on in the world right now that people need to know about.
And it's another bureaucracy that's set and ready to go for another animal if they want. What if they start finding it in foxes and stuff too? And
Well, it's already coming out. It's already H5N1.
birds, right?
That's probably for another day, Ryan. Yep.
Well, why don't we hit it quickly?
100 some million behind the H5N1. There's 800 some million behind that coming through the USDA as well.
800 million for H5N1.
Yes. I sit on the Farmer Health meetings and they talked all about it at the last meeting, and they're trying to put it all on dairy cattle now. We got to test all the milk, Ryan, and it's such a scary thing. We got to dump milk down the drain because what if it has this H5N1 virus in it that's going to get people sick?
Oh, we can see them coming for our chickens too, putting our chicken farmers out of business, raising the price of chickens, getting us on bug burgers, right? I guess we gotta eat bug burgers if all of our animals have these fake viruses.
Yep. They've been slaughtering millions of chickens. I don't know how many 100 million, I think is what the number was. It's unbelievable too, Ryan, putting even chicken farms out of business. It sounds just like CWD.
It sounds exactly like it. So let's do it. Let's do H5N1, and we'll wrap out here on some bird problems here. So the H5N1 scare, which affected Germany, I'm still reading from Virus Mania, by the way. It affected
H5N1 than I do.
Well, I've got something to read in front of me here, so that's what I know about it. The H5N1 scare started in Germany, affected Germany from an island in the Baltic Sea, but it was an artificially produced test epidemic. Exactly what you said. It's an epidemic of tests. That's what it was. So dead birds were searched for, found, and collected by the German army. And then they were tested. The occasional bird had a positive test. Was no reason to panic, since nobody can precisely say what causes a positive or negative test, because these tests are totally bogus. In any case, they said it was H5N1 virus, and they panicked. They chose to overlook that only a fraction of the dead birds in the Baltic Sea, only a fraction of them actually had positive tests. Nobody asked, well, why did the negative test birds die? Because birds die, right? Sometimes it's just asking why a bird died is different from testing it, finding a virus, and then declaring an epidemic, basically. And a lot of these dead birds didn't have this so-called H5N1. So whatever, epidemic goes on. And it could have just been because they were actually looking for dead birds that year, like they haven't always been out there testing birds. They just get it upon themselves to go and test some birds and see what they find. And then bam, we've got a new epidemic here. But there were bird scientists here that were saying, what are you talking about? These birds wintered in Germany. They didn't even come from the Baltic Sea. Like, what's going on here? So they're just total nonsense here to create an epidemic in Germany, even though these birds were not wintering in the area that they said it was. And they're basically isolated in winter anyways. These types of birds, they were isolated in winter, so that speaks against the possibility that swans somewhere became infected with H5N1. Still, they didn't care. They were not interested in proof or logic. And this was blamed on supposedly several outbreaks of avian influenza in Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, Thailand, Cambodia, China, Laos, and Malaysia. And when you look at this, they're going to say more than 100 million animals had died. But if you look at the official statements, only a fraction of the deaths were actually accounted for by H5N1. So even by their own account, the so-called virus only killed some of those birds. By far, the largest proportion of the bird deaths were a result of the mass exterminations prompted by the virus-panicked authorities. So they'll report to you 100 million birds dead from this virus, and yet the vast majority of them were actually killed by them. They killed the birds. They
Kill them all or save
exterminated
them
the
all.
birds. But it's
Kill
the
'em all.
epidemic that killed them.
Yep. Kill them to save them.
So the prevailing practice is as follows. A chicken or another bird is singled out because it lays fewer eggs or gets a blue comb, and then it's sent to the virus hunters and tests positive for H5N1. And then an epidemic of panic breaks out among humans and the media and stuff. There's an infected farm. Consequently, all chickens in close proximity are gassed to death. And ultimately, statistics showed that these 100 million chickens were killed by the avian flu virus H5N1, further fanning the flames of panic. And according to official statements, H5N1 caused the death of 153 people from the end of 2003 until November 2006, most of them in Asia. But if we study the reports of the deceased closely, there's no evidence for the theory that H5N1 was the killer. At the same time, the reports allow completely different possibilities to appear as plausible explanations. For example, that some of the victims were suffering from cold symptoms of an unknown source and then simply had the bad luck to fall into the hands of the medical professionals who turned out to be H5N1 hunters. So they had a cold or flu, which does kill hundreds of thousands of people every year regardless. And then if there's one of these swine flu, avian flu panics happening at that time, they're going to test you for that. And if you happen to test positive for it, then you're going to be called a victim of this epidemic. And of course, immediately doctors prescribed prodigious amounts of medications in order to wipe out an imaginary virus. But in truth, it was never shown that these medications could combat the alleged virus. On the contrary, it is a fact that the medications are highly toxic, for which reason it is completely possible that the doctors helped to kill these people with their drugs, right? Sort of like COVID here, right? Oh, you got the flu. We're going to give you remdesivir. You're going to die, right? And it's going to be blamed on COVID. And yeah, we're talking about Tamiflu here, and Tamiflu was never tested for effectiveness against H5N1, and Tamiflu is a very deadly drug, and yet that's what was used. And President George W. Bush at that time basically threatened that 2 million Americans might die from this H5N1. So, based on nothing more than wild speculation, he purchased 200 million bottles of Tamiflu. With your money, Dusty, because I'm Canadian. Your money, purchased 200 million bottles of Tamiflu at $100 each. $2 billion for a fake bird virus.
Doesn't surprise me.
And there was another similar event here in the Netherlands, the Dutch bird flu panic of 2003, where 26 million chickens in the Netherlands were killed, and another 2.5 million in Belgium, and 100,000 in Germany. That's a lot of birds there, because they found one sick bird, I think. Could have been more than that. But whatever, they found a few sick birds and they killed millions of birds. 26 million chickens in the Netherlands. My gosh. And of course, this is only done with indirect test procedures. Just test the birds. You don't even look for symptoms. The first ones might be based on symptoms. They might see a sick bird, might see a one with a weak beak or less color or whatever. And then they go and test them all at the farm or just exterminate them en masse. 30 million birds total ish. And I'll give you one more. Okay. In Canada, British Columbia, Canada. November 2005. A single duck, wild duck here, not a farm duck. A single duck was allegedly detected as having the avian flu virus H7N3 using the modern indirect molecular biological proof procedures. It was officially reported that the animal only had a, quote, mild form of this virus type. Must be a slow virus. A mild form of this virus type, which produces no or only mild disease symptoms. That is to say, the duck was not sick. But as a preventative measure, the authorities not only killed that duck, they immediately slaughtered 56,000 duck and geese. And yet the international statutes clearly certainly did not require such drastic measures like killing entire flocks of birds, especially in a so-called, quote, low pathogenic virus in this game. Good job, boys. Like, wow, you think these people are proud of this? You think they really think that they're doing something good here?
I think our agencies believe they are, Ryan. They think they're truly trying to stop a disease that's going to kill our wildlife off.
Have you
And they're
spoken with any of them directly?
many times, many times.
What do they say about this?
They're so it's all an agenda. It's all being pushed from above, Ryan. They
Th-
just their narrative through and through.
they just believe it.
They believe it. Yep.
We got to do this, or CWD is going to get all the deer.
Yep. They believe the research papers, they believe the graphics, they believe it all. Even though numbers don't show it.
We got to kill the deer, or the deer are going to die, guys.
Exactly. They always go back to Colorado, Saskatchewan, Wyoming, where they are losing their deer, and they're saying it's because of CWD because of their test. They're 70%, 80% drop in deer population. Well, Colorado, Wyoming, I know. I mean, have they ever tried supplemental feed? I mean, there's deserts in those places. What's the nutrition like in those soils in pine country in Colorado, in the deserts and sage of Wyoming? I'm not saying they have CWD because I guarantee 95% of them don't, but they have something maybe because they're so nutrient deficient.
So, how long has that decrease happened over?
I'm not sure, probably 20, 30 years, I would imagine. But they also have a lot of predation in those places too, like mountain lions and bobcats and coyotes and stuff as well. It's just not good studies.
Even though the deer populations are going down in those places, they're going up in other places.
Yes, by the thousands. Wisconsin, like I said, they've 2002 is when the big push was in all these states, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Texas, the same year, because that's when the money was pushed. There's deer units in Wisconsin that are 50, 60% positive, and their population continues to grow. Their buck harvest continue to grow. And in Texas, their population is like 6 million now. Deer herd in Texas with only 700 positives. That's not a contagious, deadly disease. That's what makes me think like Wyoming, Colorado, it's got to be nutrient deficiencies in those deer. If they even have CWD, it's just something, but like a zinc deficiency can cause a deer to go, to get sick and spin circles and emaciate. There's a lot of different nutrient deficiencies in Doc's book of disease of exotic animals that can cause a deer to spin.
Yeah, and deer move around too, right? Like they're not trapped in Wyoming. If they don't want to be in Wyoming, they can go to Montana. They can wander around. Populations are not 100% stable.
Yep, they migrate. They
And
can migrate. Yep, and they're licking each other all the time, licking their fawns. I mean, that's just what they do. They lick scrape trees, rug trees. But the only thing that gets I guess, with not necessarily the agencies, but the farm service industry is talking about and what's in the bill is genomes, Ryan. That's what gets. They always go back to scrapie. Well, we got rid of the prion gene in sheep in 15 years, and now our sheep no longer get it. Well, they never have eradicated it. Anyone can look it up on the USDA. They never have eradicated scrapie. They just quit testing for it, and they say they got rid of this prion gene, and that's what they're really pushing hard in the deer now as well, Ryan. So, but yet they have no pictures of prions all the way through scrapie.
And we have no proven success with any genetic therapy, so-called, right?
Now they're saying they have peer-reviewed documents where they can have CWD resistant deer up to 80%. They still get it, but doesn't take as long. But Dr. Wallach's epigenetics proves all those theories wrong. There are no genetically transmitted diseases.
Yeah, just nonsense.
Yep.
And yeah, we'd have to go a little bit too deep into the deep dive to go and check out those studies and everything. I just don't believe a word of it at all. And yeah, the idea that the government Superman here is going to come in and save us by doing gene therapy on our deer, I mean, you need to stop it. This is too much.
And you can't prove it's contagious to begin with, and the numbers don't even show it. We don't even need the genomes. Just it's a testing epidemic with them, all the money behind it.
Yeah, but that sounds expensive, man. Injecting these deer with blowguns or something. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm
Stop.
gonna have to do another dive on that one.
Yeah, we could come back for a super deep dive on a part two. Or yeah, you can put out the part two of the CWD. They missed it by a million miles documentary,
There
which
you
one
go.
once again I do highly recommend this, and you should share it as well. You know, a lot of people we're trying to wake up our friends and family and stuff to human diseases, and for a lot of people that's too much for them to accept. You know, maybe we can crack the door open a little bit on them with this deer thing because they're not personally attached to it.
Right.
They're not emotionally attached to this most likely. Well, if you can buy that the government would create a bureaucracy to control a fake disease in animals, maybe that's one step closer to getting them to understand how they do the same thing with humans.
Exactly. Yep. And maybe people will grasp the zombie deer disease. That's what you see all over the media and the mainstream. The zombie deer disease.
Is that
That's what
what
we're talking. That's what
that
they call CWD.
zombie deer?
Yep, the mainstream media. Yep.
We've probably all seen a sick old animal. I mean, it's not a cause to have $1 billion thrown at this problem.
Right.
It can happen. Animals get old. Animals can be nutrient
Or
deficient.
restrict. Yep. Or kill. Yep.
They can drink from contaminated rivers and
Right.
all this
Right.
stuff. Like there is a pollution problem. There is a agricultural runoff problem. This if anything is causing this problem with these deer, I think that's it. Yeah, standard nutrient deficiencies and also farm runoff, agricultural runoff,
Right.
or eating crops that were freshly sprayed.
Right. There's a lot of toxins out there.
A lot of toxins, especially in farmland. So I enjoyed this, Dusty. What do you think? What do you think the future is for this on the pessimistic side and the optimistic side?
Well, I think the next couple of years, CWD is going to be no more. I think it's just going to fade away.
But they're going to keep the money.
Now they're going to try to keep the money. But as of today, that federal bill passed of December 2022, and there is still yet to be any of the money allocated.
Really?
Correct.
So they won the money, but they didn't get it.
You can get it. So let's just cross our fingers. They ain't going to get it. They won't get it.
Yeah,
The
that would
people
be great.
are standing up in several different states, and we're making a lot of progress. And I just got word yesterday that no more killings of breeder deer in the state of Texas. There won't be any more slaughterings. So the people are already making a big difference.
Very good. The last thing we need is another government agency. My gosh. Is there are there petitions and stuff that people can sign online or anything like that?
You know, there is a few out there. I'll have to look into it though. Um, I guess legislation's just the best way to go. And in your state, look up and just get people involved, and that's what we did. Like my wife's got a chronic wasting disease Facebook page, and maybe you can put that on the link too as well, Ryan.
Absolutely.
I can get on and follow that page. We put, they might not be interested in it, but click on it and share it. Maybe some of your family and friends will be. So talk to your legislators, educate your legislators, bring some bills.
Yeah, see how you could be involved and bring this back into the city folk and stuff. Look, I know there's a lot of people who they ask me, and what do we do? How do we be healthier? How do we create a healthier world? Well, yeah, growing some of your own food is a part of that. We planted some apple trees this year and stuff, and like it's a part of that. I like to have some chickens and stuff, but I don't know if you've ever tried to take care of goats. It's a heck of a lot of work. It's a heck of a lot of work. You better like lifting hay bales. You better like doing goat chores because you got to do a lot of goat chores. I'm just saying that a lot of people have this idea that the answer is that everyone has a homestead. And while that might be part of it, especially with chickens, they're way easier to take care of, but they're still a fair bit of work. But when you start talking about bigger animals like goats and sheep and cows, you're talking a huge commitment here. It's not easy to care for these animals. They're not self-sufficient. Your chickens can wander around and eat bugs and stuff, but even still, you have to take care of them. And you're not going to be able to get hundreds of pounds of meat easily. It's not going to happen easily. And it's not going to happen on a little bit of land either. You got to have a fair bit of land. I'm just saying the homesteading dream is somewhat reachable for a lot of us. But when you start talking about bigger animals, it starts to quickly become less and less feasible.
Yep.
But we have an abundance of big animals out there. And if anything, helping to actually appropriately manage ruminant animals, herds of bison, of deer, of caribou, of elk, of moose. I think this is very important for the ecosystem. I just read a really good book. It's called Sacred Cow, and they made a really good case for introducing more and more ruminant animals for basically soil health, right? And as a food source, not just cows on farms. Like, we should bring the bison back. We slaughtered millions and millions of bison, and now we're seeing desertification, basically, where bison used to roam on grasslands. A lot of that is dust bowl, right? Ruminants can help sustain the soil and help rebuild soil. So having deer around is good. Having elk around is good. Having caribou around is good. And they're excellent food sources. And I'm just saying that for those people with this dream in their head of having a homestead, you are going to be shocked by how much work it is to do all this stuff. And compare that to shooting a deer. Oh my gosh. Way easier, right? You have to raise these animals up and stuff too. You got to do goat chores for a year or two before you get to eat that goat. Whereas nature's doing this for us. And if you think that we're overcrowded and, there's no wildlife left. A lot of people have this idea in their head, Dusty, that like everything is a city just because they're in the city all the time. No, it's not. This country is huge and it's mostly empty. And there's plenty of room for all these deer and other animals that would give us an excellent food source. And if you're looking for the type of life that's going to be healthier and more ecologically sustainable than living in cities and shopping at grocery stores, buying industrial food, then to me, hunting and fishing is a big part of that. And it's the hunters and the fishers that seem to be the only ones that are actually concerned about the real ecosystem instead of just complaining in the cities and still going to the grocery store to buy industrial food. Right. And not all of us have access or can even afford farmers markets for that matter. Right. We're throwing that out there as well. Where we are here north of Houston. Oh, my gosh. Everything is so expensive. I think they just take advantage of us here. We go to the farmers market. It's the most expensive meat I've ever seen in my whole life. I'm not paying it. I'm not doing it. I want good quality meat, but this is ridiculous. So there is a lot of good quality meat out there, but if we believe that there's a fake virus tainting it all or something, and we have government agencies spending hundreds of millions of dollars to kill that stuff and incinerate it or whatever, then, I mean, we're losing an excellent food source. And this is part of the future to me. Not everyone should have a homestead. We can do a bit of homesteading, and we can do a lot of hunting as well.
That's right. And we can do some bartering too. If you love the city life, find some locals that do hunt and trade. That's what we do. We trade some deer meat for fish or just all sorts of stuff.
Well, just don't let the government put all your deer farmers out of business too, and that'll give you another source.
Right. We're making progress, a lot of progress. So we're doing good there. We just got to keep battling.
Even farm deer are healthier than a cow to me in many cases. We shouldn't be living off of cows. Again, I don't have a problem with cows, but to live off them, I think we're throwing our macronutrients off pretty big.
Sure. Yeah, it just takes all the above. Yep.
So you're hopeful. You see progress. You think we're going to take this down. They haven't gotten their money yet. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully people hear this. Hopefully they help get the word out and do what they can against this problem. Seems a little bit more politically feasible to stop this from happening than to shut down the mainstream medical world outright kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. That one's on steroids.
Bit of an easier target here, yeah.
Basically the same principle, but just in a lot smaller scale. Yep. Cool. Watch the movie, watch the video of Dr. Wallach and ourselves, and follow the Facebook page. And feel free to reach out.
Awesome, Dusty. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you having me.
Obscure topic, more people need to know about.
Really appreciate it.
You can come back on here anytime you like.
Sounds good, Ryan. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Remember that you can find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including all the books that I've written and helped publish. and an archive of this podcast there that you can download those episodes for free in case we ever get taken down again. All of our channels, we're most active on Instagram, but we're also active on Facebook and TikTok and stuff now. Those links are in the description, but you can also always just find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org. Thank you one more time, Dusty. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.